Hi, everybody, and welcome to tonight's MHTV. Tonight, we've got with us Beverley Powell, who is an equality, diversity, and inclusion specialist, leadership coach, and forthcoming author. In a minute, I'll go over to Beverley, who will say a little bit about herself. But first, I'm going to go over to Nicky to explain how you can join in tonight.
Yeah, we really want to hear from you, and I'm sure Beverley wants all your questions as well. So if you are following us on X stroke Twitter, follow us under the hashtag MHTV and put your questions there. We'll see them and we'll feed them in. Otherwise, if you're on the Facebook Live page with us now, feel free just to type in and we'll pass things across. Thank you very much. Back to Vanessa.
Lovely. Thank you. So Beverley, just over to you really, first of all, just to say a few words. I know tonight we're going to be talking about your personal and your professional journey, which I'm sure lots of people will be really interested in. So do you want to just start by saying a few things about yourself?
Oh,
Just to
gosh.
introduce.
Well, first of all, I'd like to say that I'm delighted to be here. How exciting and honoured to be in this space with yourselves. So yeah, thank you very much. A little bit about me, perhaps useful if I set some context about a little bit about my identity actually.
Yeah.
So I am from Greater Manchester, actually Lancashire, and I am the eldest daughter of Jamaican parents. We settled in Lancashire, or my family settled in Lancashire, and my grandfather arrived first from Jamaica, and that was in the late 50s. So I was around without sharing my age too much. But yeah, so I was around in the cotton mills. I'm from Fred Dibner country, Bolton. So that really set the scene for me. So hence my accent. So really multiple identities, really. I'm British, I'm Jamaican, I am African, of African descent. My ancestors are from slavery, so 250 years of shackled slavery. And that still lives through me, in me, and I bring a lot of wisdom, sage wisdom from my father, mother, grandmother, and the like. So yeah, so I arrived into the NHS 2009, and I left Greater Manchester and came further up north. Also horrors of family, leaving family and coming up north. And I came up north and I have never gone back. So I'm here within the NHS and I'm enjoying life in Yorkshire. That's me.
Yeah, Yorkshire is the best place to live. I'm sure Nicky would debate that, but yeah. No, I mean, I think it's really interesting as well, isn't it, to think about people's identities and histories, both in terms of the people that we look after and the people who work in our services. And I think for me, only recently, really, that it feels like that we've really started to make some progress with that. I don't know what you think. I guess it's different in different organisations, but
yeah, I think there's something really important about identity, and I know I really take on what the Greek philosophers talk about, or one of the Greek philosophers. I don't know if it's Socrates or Pythagoras, but it's about knowing yourself, know thyself. So I think it's really important that you know yourself. I mean, as I'm here with you in this space, I'll be deemed as a Black woman, and even the term Black is socially constructed. So when we think about how we differentiate each other and demarcate each other and the impacts of that has, but there's something equally, some depth about knowing thyself, know thyself, and not wearing this cloak of being a Black woman and playing into the narratives or feeding into the narrative. So there's something about socially constructed identity, and there's something about knowing thyself from the inner, which is the work I'm doing from the inner self and knowing myself and celebrating myself, actually. So there's something about celebrating myself, giving myself permission to celebrate myself. And also recently what I've learned, developed, is to celebrate being perfectly imperfect. I've lived a life of trying to be perfect. and by whose standards, by whose system standards. So there's something about standards, system thinking, and being minoritized by others, where actually I am part of the global majority.
Yeah.
So I'm part of the global majority, but in some cases I'm still deemed as being a minority. So actually, when we talk about these things, it has an impact on the psyche. It has a big impact on the psyche. So there's something about, knowing thyself, which is why I'm really diving into this, particularly over the last couple of years. I would say during COVID, just before COVID, it's like I probably had a second awakening. The Greek call the menopause second spring. And I think all these ideas and things that have come to me has been in my second spring, as the Chinese call it. So so I am celebrating being perfectly imperfect, my creativity, my inner identity, and me.
Yes, I love it. And for people who are listening tonight, what helped you, I guess, burn your superhero cloak, as well, as we're going to hear about in a minute? But what helped you come to that realization? Because I think that lots of people struggle with that, don't they, particularly in the professional lives?
Yeah, it's not easy. I guess when I reflect on the various roles that I've had, it's been very formulaic. So I spent some time working in the police service for 14 years. Again, structure, systems, ways of being, and to assimilate. And then I worked in the prison service and invited to lead in the prison service after the untimely murder of the Muslim teenager Zaid Mubarak and the Home Office recommendation. So again, think about the structures and the hierarchies and things. And I think I just got on with it, which is I just got on with it. And then I realised time is marching on. I'm getting into my second spring, and I'm thinking, well, actually, getting into reflecting, and the more I've wrote and journaled and just reflected and discovered an alternative practice for myself as part of my self-care in this second spring. And I think these things I suppose when you think about a spring, it starts as a little spring, and then it just, and it just happened like that, and it grew, quite organic, really. So I think it wasn't a case of waking up in the morning and suddenly this is what's going to happen. But I think there was probably a number of signs and things. And I think my body actually said, this is what's happening. So you can either choose to go that way or that way. And I started to explore a change in diet, the way that I eat, the way that I sleep. And all these things required an element of selfishness, actually. Instead of the older sister giving to everything, being to everybody, it required me to really be introspective and look at self and think long term around that. So I think it was that series of events that caused me to really focus on doing me, being me, doing me, and being happy with me, and not trying to fit into all these molds over the years I've tried to. I've got there. So meditation and a variety of different things, which I've journaled, and now I'm translating into my book on a number of areas and a couple of principles which have really helped to shape me as I go along. They may not work for everybody, but equally there's something about the African female author Chimamanda Adichie, and she talks about the danger of the single story. She's on TED Talks, and she talks about when she first went to university in England and the experiences and the expectations that people had because she came from Africa. And actually the outcome of that story is there is the danger of the single story. So whilst I'm sharing my story as a Jamaican woman, as somebody brought up in Lancashire, and the very twists and turns I've had, this is my story, and it would be totally different to somebody else's. But we can fall into the trap of assimilating and we lose our identity and we just see the outer shell of people. And that's why I just felt I need to capture this. I need to write it down. I need to journal. I need to articulate this. What would if I was my younger self, I would want to read a book to hear about these twists and turns and how the author's navigated life in the black body, and how has she navigated that and how she got to where she is. And there wasn't such a book. So I decided to write it. The Black American author, Toni Morrison, said, if you want to write a book and you don't see any book that tells your story, then write it.
Yeah, absolutely.
So yeah.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to reading it. I mean, there's so much there, isn't there? Where do we start, both in terms of, you know, what you were talking about, telling your story, but also the way that the different elements of our identity intersect, and the way we can be many things, can't we? And I was thinking about, came to me a memory that when I first started going to work in a female prison, and the first thing I saw was a leaflet by a really well-known black male boxer who had put a leaflet which was really nice in some ways. You know, it was a message of hope, but I looked at it and I thought to myself, interesting, this message just does not apply at all in a female prison, because there's something about gender that's kind of missed entirely. And I think what you're saying, yeah, it really strikes a chord with me, really, about us needing to look more from that intersectional lens, really, and understand people from a variety of different perspectives and the experiences people have had, of course, which are all entirely different.
Yeah, and there's a lot to be said. And one of the things that I saw, particularly during the George Floyd era, is that we have more in common than we have which separates us. And I'll never forget seeing, it was an image in America, and it was all women all linking, white women all linking each other. The police were facing them, white women was all linking each other, and the black woman was at the back. So it was womanhood joining ranks and supporting womanhood and supporting the black women and really putting themselves on the line. And often we forget, and we're so busy looking at the things that divide us, when there's so much that brings us together. So I tend to like to look at from that perspective. You know, I'm not silly enough to think that there are other things, but you can choose to focus on one element of life, or you can choose to focus on another element of life. And I guess that's become more apparent for me over the years. And then that links into well-being. So many of my community have struggled over the years in terms of mental health. We haven't had the facilities to really understand mental health from the lens of race. A book I haven't quite finished reading. It's quite a rich book, but it was recommended to me by a black female psychotherapist. The book was by Resma Menican, called My Grandmother's Hands. Beautiful book, and talks about historically, takes you back into history, and talks about the trauma that we have, or particularly from the black body. It's sort of 14 ancestors. We'll go back to ancestors. It's 14, 15 years steps back. And when we think about pregnancy, if your mother was traumatized, then, the blood and everything else, and the oxygen and everything, you're going to get that. And if she was, so it's there. So we can't discount trauma. We've got trauma now, but there's trauma historically, and how the impact that can have when it manifests itself, and then other things that pile on. So I'm quite mindful, and it just took me back to understanding trauma and the black body of trauma as well. As you said, Vanessa, you referred back to your career working in the prison, and I probably didn't realise it until I left the prison, but because I was so much into doing the job and doing what I needed to do. But the prison population was 30% that looked like me, 30% black men. And I'm there with a bunch of keys and in this position of leadership and power, and you think about all those dynamics and the experiences that you see, you hear, because you're a prisoner yourself in that confinement, actually. And you think about that. And I think there's something really important in terms of what I've learned recently is to listen to the body. So I've learned I'm very comfortable with silence. Some people aren't. But listening to the body, what is my body saying? What's my inner child trying to say? How does it feel when I read something or see something? So I'm allowing my body to speak, where before I would override that into the ego and do something else or be busy. And now I've learned to slow down and let the body speak or let the inner child speak. And I don't think I've ever done that before. And it's tough, it's hard. And I think this is where you mentioned the book, Vanessa, and I think that's where it's come from. This notion about the cloak and burning my Superwoman Cape. You know, from an early age, I wore the cape. I had a cape, and I was thinking of that analogy of a cape. And the cape protects you from so many things, and I wore that cape of assimilation. I wore the cape of protecting my emotions, not showing any emotions, just doing what was required of me and the expectations from society, from family, all those things, first generation Jamaicans, what they would tell you, all those things, having to work twice as hard, I was told, than my white counterparts, whatever you do. So that was setting the scene at a very early age. And that is no shade on my family. That is how they lived, this a level of protection around that. And we can only, see that where we are today. So for years and years, I wore a cloak of that. So that meant I really didn't know myself because I was so busy trying to fit in, accommodate, please people, possibly have no boundaries.
Yeah.
Had no boundaries. And then suddenly the menopause came and gave me some boundaries. Forced me to have some boundaries.
Yeah, it's interesting that, isn't it? I think a lot of people will relate to that as well. And I think there is a culture of that as well in the health service. So I think that would be an additional layer to it, the sense that we're healers and helpers to other people. And in order to do that, we have to have these sort of resilient, perfect lives and be particular people. And then, as we know, so many people burn out at some point from that process. But it's really interesting to hear you talk about it from a growth perspective, I think, as well, and a healing perspective. That's what I pick up from what you're saying. Whereas I think for a lot of people listening, and people don't always realise, do they, that I know for you've just said that the menopause was the turning point, but I don't think people always realise that they're getting to that point, really, and that, people don't always take a step back, do they, and think about how they need to start protecting themselves and, having some, time to care for themselves, really. And as you say, to remove the cape and be yourself and be authentic as well. So I think it's a really important message, definitely. And Nicky, I know you're nodding away there. So do you want to come in at this point? Then
I am busy typing and retweeting all the really good book suggestions, quotes, getting them out there. The thing that's come through so far is people asking a little bit about your experience of leadership. Particularly as a Black woman, so that would be interesting. I think if we could talk a little bit about that. I don't know if you want to do that yet or perhaps a little bit later on, but I think that's something that's showing people got some interest in that, particularly understanding it.
Yeah, I think the menopause just just arrived, and I was working in a provider trust, so I was busy, and I didn't have the time for menopause. I'm busy, so busy. Being busy, that this thing that just suddenly came up on me really forced me to make account of myself. And then probably 12, 18 months later, I had my very first panic attack, and I thought I was having a heart attack. I have never experienced anything like it, and it happened at work. It was just an awful feeling, and it was just a mixture of embarrassment because I thought I was having a heart attack and I had to go into another room. I was opening the window to get fresh air. I just didn't know what to do with myself. And a colleague of mine rushed me to the an A&E walk-in centre in the city. And the GP said to me, what are you doing? And I explained to her I'd just moved house. I was moving house on my own. I was still working. I was studying. And she just shook her head. She said, you're not having a heart attack. She said, you're doing too much. You're doing too much. And just, told me to go home and just lie down. It was, so that again was another message and another awakening there that, come on, Beverley, you need to really look after you and stop doing things for everybody else and being busy. So yeah, I've never experienced that before. And what I'm understanding from many women, high profile women, those who are day-to-day women like myself, panic attacks seem to be quite common, and they come just come on you from nowhere. So there's something about my practice, my personal practice, and things that I start to do to manage me and steady me, which is great. But I never had to do so. It's just been a whole new way of working, and as a leader, there's a whole new way of being. And what I felt is being my authentic self has allowed me and give myself permission to be me, instead of wearing this cloak of being invincible and I can do everything and pushing through and expecting everyone to push through and being the role model, and then going home and absolutely collapsing until the next day. So I've really, those are the things that I've done in terms of my leadership style. It's more about having self-compassion, actually. There's something about giving myself grace if I do something wrong. Learning to laugh at myself as well. For years, I took myself too seriously because the world took the black woman in a black body seriously. If you did something wrong, it was bigger than anybody else. Or if you laughed, it was wherever you turned, it was just, all eyes on. And I've learned to just give myself grace, give myself permission. And in turn, my leadership style has changed. I'm more about compassion and grace, and particularly during COVID, and seeing lots of colleagues like myself, a higher representation, no longer with us, and interviewing nurses of colour was on the front line to understand from Freedom to Speak Up Guardian. I was tasked to do a piece of work nationally, looking at our frontline nurses. I was looking at PPE and what nurses are on the front line and all those things. These were just signs about things that the system, had to do things, but things that we need to do as well. It's something about being boundaried. There's no harm, I've learned, in saying no. And saying no is reclaiming me. So what I found is this thing about being more boundaried as a leader, having more compassion and grace, and putting myself first I felt it's been something around liberation. I've actually felt, it's weird, but I've liberated myself because I've given myself permission. It's okay, and it's okay to rest, and it's okay to be and do nothing. Where I had to be busy at the weekend, I had to be doing something and being busy, but sitting there is just an act of liberation. And as Audre Lorde, the famous black woman feminist, talks about, radical self-care is an act of liberation. She said political warfare, but I would say it's an act of liberation, just liberating myself. And what I found is when I've done that and going into understanding racial trauma and psychotherapy, when I do that, I know that my ancestors are resting because they could never rest on the plantation. They were going all the time. And what I understand is when you rest, your ancestors are able to rest as well. So, yeah. It's a bit deep, but that's where I am.
Yeah, awful, isn't it? Yeah. Nicky?
Yeah, I think a lot of what you're saying, particularly about the way that Black women are subjected to a totally different scrutiny. Like you say no, you're angry. It's like, that's not what just happened. And then also this expectation that somehow they'll tolerate more or work harder or do more. And like, why?
Yeah.
And it kind of almost plays in, I think you get this a lot sometimes in nursing and health and social care, that almost plays into your sense of self, like, oh, I can manage, I can do more, and maybe you can, but like, don't do more. What do you think about that? Those sorts of
It's so true.
images?
And there is the narrative which is wrapped around Black women.
Yeah.
And then there's two sides of what I'm hearing from colleagues globally over the water. There's lots of Black American women who are in the hustle culture, trying to achieve, doing this,
Yes.
doing that. And then there's another community of Black women who are saying, actually, there's a book, I've forgotten the author's name, called The Nap Ministry. The Nap Ministry, and it's okay to rest and get off the treadmill, I call it. So my Black colleagues laugh at me when I say this, but I say I'm getting off the plantation, because I often feel systems are like the plantation for me. You know, you've got whoever's at the top. It doesn't tend to reflect me at the top. You do these things, and in return, it's transactional. You get your salary, and you do these things, and you run yourself down to the ground because you want to achieve. And when I think about it, as a little girl, I was told that whatever you do, you've got to work twice. So the scene was set for me, being in this Black body, that I knew being in this Black body, I've got to push myself and work twice as hard to be accepted. Even going to school, I remember my family mother saying, you know, even when you go to school, your uniform, you've got to look twice as smart just to be treated the same. So she wasn't saying ego-led to be better than, but whatever you do to be. And I thought, years later, I'm coming off this plantation. I don't want it. I don't. Whose life am I living for everybody else? And this is why the book I called it "Burning My Superwoman Cape," because this narrative about the Black woman, she's working shifts. When I've seen it in different systems, they're working shifts. The quick changeover patterns. They've got children, the child minding, the cooking, the cleaning, all these things. And then there's this narrative. And it worries me, because when I think about trauma over the years, and when I think about some of the experiments that was conducted on the plantation, they were conducted on Black women because we were deemed as not having a higher pain threshold. So there was lots of gynecological tests and things on Black women, and they were tested before they become, I don't know, pain sensitive or tested on the white woman. And I think this narrative can continue, and the experiences, certainly from colleagues I know of colour and friends and family members, in terms of being a patient, that we have a higher pain threshold. So we may not need A, B, or C, when my white patient may need it. So we are still seen as being strong. And that has been used as a compliment to me. And I have to say, I'm not a fan of it, because I am humanity, the same as everybody else. I'm as strong as anybody else. Cut me and I bleed, I can cry. It's about feeling safe. And it's for me in my Black body, you know, where can I feel safe to be me? Because this narrative is, you know, you're strong. So suddenly if you burst out crying, they probably want to section you, because, oh my God, you know, a Black woman upset is crying. So it's just a totally different lens. And as we know, there's lots of books about white fragility. And, you know, the fragility, white women can cry, Black women can't, or if we cry, it's deemed in a different way. We see it so many times around that. And in work situations as a coach, I've heard that being played out to me around white colleagues or white women being fragile. And there's a book there about, you know, why I'm no longer talking to white people about race. So, you know, there's all those things, which is, you know, it's just time to rest. I am in my second spring. And it's time
there's so many things you're saying. So many things. The first thing that comes to my mind is this idea about how hard it is for first generation parents, and sometimes the things they do to protect their children, to prepare their children, because that's what you want, isn't it? You want to keep your kids safe. So all the things they build around second generation children born in this country or growing up in this culture to try and protect them can be things that actually later on need discarding. And that's a really tough situation to be in.
It's exactly what was happening there for my family. They were protecting and having those conversations. This is what you've got to do. So really, you could say it's survival technique. This is what you've got to do to survive without being blatant about it, to survive. But also what I saw from my family, and that I'm so grateful that my family were workers. So I saw a household where they were working. Mother was going to night school. She was doing this, she was doing that, always working. And so that work ethic was born into all of us. The work ethic. So I saw that. That's what happened. But again, I can't say it's from ancestors, but all my ancestors have been at it. They've been at it, granddad, father, everybody. We've all been. So it's just that work ethic. But you keep running and you keep running, and then when you sometimes you don't know how to stop, and that's where the body, the inner child or somebody needs to stop and listen, but you're still on that trajectory all the time. So this is where I'm finding time now to be, just be and enjoy the creative side, which is, I think, my soul. My soul is allowing my soul. So being in nature, gardening, cooking, journaling, meditation, just being, and just slowing down the pace of life is, it's mind, body, and soul for me. That's where I am at the moment, which is why I was inspired with the book.
And it sounds almost like you're kind of recovering your sense of self as well, because this pain that constantly, particularly women of color in those kind of exposed leadership roles, where it's like if a man fails, then it's just it's one of those things where if a woman fails, particularly a black woman fails, it's like, look, we always said they couldn't do it, and you're like, that's so unfair. That's not what we've learned here.
Self-fulfilling prophecy, all those things, which is why I recently was invited to do a presentation at the London Region, NHS London Region conference on the imposter syndrome. So clearly there was a big ask, and it was for women of colour. I talked about the imposter syndrome. And there's something about programming, how we've been programmed through media, what we see, all those things. So there's a lot of deprogramming. So when I took the cloak off, there's something about deprogramming, but also I also put in the book, there's a health warning here. You just take away the cloak, and then you've got years and years of this stuff. So you can't just expect to suddenly switch it on and deprogram. You've got years of work to go through. So what I found as a coach, coaching others, they can only go so far in terms of goal setting because they haven't done the inner work and the self-belief and the deprogramming of all that stuff. So there's something really, we can talk about coaching, but there's a lot of deep inner work that needs to be done. I mean, obviously I'm talking from the lens of a woman and of race, but that would be to anybody really. You've got to really know yourself and know that it's possible. I mean, I don't even like the word imposter syndrome because it denotes a medical model, and I don't believe it isn't a medical model. It's just some way that we may have been programmed through things we've seen, read, and it's just been fed into us year after year after year, and we sort of start to live it and embody it. So when we decide, no, enough is enough, there's something about how do I unpick that over years and years, and what level of support do I need to do that as well? Because some of it's pretty painful. There's some of that stuff that's been hiding under my cloak for many years. Some of that stuff that I've refused to revisit. But in order for me to get into my second spring and enjoy it, there's something about taking away the cloak and recognizing that I am perfectly imperfect and enjoying life as it is, and just giving myself that permission, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think so. And I think there's strength in vulnerability as well, isn't there? And that's kind of a really important message as well, that, being able to show vulnerability is actually being much stronger and much braver than not being able to show any vulnerability. And I was thinking as well, as you were talking about post-traumatic growth, because we've talked about ancestral trauma, and we've talked about having to be a particular way, but now earning the superhero, superwoman cloak. It's kind of all that's coming away now, but actually that there's a strength in that, isn't there? And there's growth from that. And I think, again, it's a powerful message for people listening, but it's also about thinking about the next generation after you now, isn't it? That you'll be giving a different message to the next generation to what your ancestors gave you. And you know, I've got an increasing interest in sort of epigenetics and the concept that we can change our genetics, can't we, as well? And, you know, the trauma that we've experienced, we can change it through our experiences.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of epigenetics as well. So we can either, or I can choose to live the life of my ancestors in slavery, or I can choose to outsource some of the external stimuli, which is through social media and all the rest of the stuff, and outsource that. I don't need that anymore, and look within and start to heal. And it's quite healing as well, because all this stuff is pervasive. I mean, I'm a child of probably give my age, a child of the 60s. So I was around before the Race Relations Act. So some of the experiences I had can't be mentioned, but I can choose to be a victim or choose to move away from that and use some of that to help others in terms of that. So, and when I do that, I found that to be quite healing as well. So I use some of those experiences around that to serve humanity. You know, I always believe that anybody leading ED United, piece of humanity, humanitarian work. It is humanitarian. It cuts across everybody, and it is humanitarian work in whichever shape or form. So for me, this book is around leadership legacy, and that term can often be scoffed because people think, "Oh, you only write it. Are you doing something because you're dying?" Well, actually, no. And I think that came to light more. I was listening to Oprah Winfrey some while ago in a conversation. She was talking about her story over the years. Leadership legacy is, we've all got that, and it's for everybody we touched. That's a legacy. Every conversation we've had with people over the years, how we've left them. You know, as Gandhi says, be the person we want to be. That's legacy. Every conversation, every place that we've worked, that's our legacy, our leadership legacy. So as a leader, I'm leading within a new era of me, my second spring, and a new era of this chaotic world. I can no longer lead the way I used to do 10, 15 years ago. It's not appropriate. It wouldn't fit. So my leadership style is different. And I guess because I'm doing the inner work, there's something about, I'd like to think, that my leadership style is slightly different.
Yeah. I've got a couple of questions come through. So one is,
I suppose on that.
Sorry, we're so close to like 40 minutes now. I've just got a couple of questions. I'm just desperate to get them in. Is that all right if I quickly?
It's all right. You're going to speak faster.
So one is,
go for it.
One is again coming back to that question about leadership. Do you have any, from year one student, do you have any suggestions on how I can become a better leader? Because that's what I want to do. And then also thinking about the fact that it's not just one group of people's job to sort all this out. I wondered if you've got any thoughts on inclusive leadership and what everybody can do to make this situation fairer or better.
Yeah. There's something about, so I'll go back to front. So something we can do, there's something about being our authentic self. And as a leader, there's something about being open and honest and saying, look, I don't have all the answers, but what can we do together? So Amy Edmondson talks about psychological safety. So how can I, as a leader, ensure that my colleagues or whoever I'm leading feel psychologically safe? So being open, transparent. If you don't have the answers, don't fluff it. Be honest. Get back to somebody when you say you're going to get back to somebody. The other question, as a leader, I'm a big fan of journaling. It isn't for everybody. But I've still got my first book on the first day that I landed in the NHS in 2009 in January. And I wrote in it there, And what it helps me to do is to flip back and see some of the challenges, some of the successes, because often we're so busy doing in this chaotic, busy world, we forget to celebrate our successes or recognize how far we've come, or the indicators are, I'm this band, so yes, I've done well. But actually, there's other things around that leadership legacy, around having those conversations or whatever. So I'm a fan of reflective journaling, or speaking in a recorder, or speaking into your phone and keeping that for posterity and measuring that and celebrating your own personal successes. I think that's a powerful tool to use as a leader.
Yeah. Well, it's funny, but I was going to ask, that's what I was going to ask about. I was going to ask about leadership tips, because I think as we come into the end, it's really important, isn't it? And I guess on that note, I'm wondering, are there any other messages that you would give to people who are watching tonight, people who identify with you, people who this is all completely new to some people listening? Have any take-home messages?
Yeah, I think there's a message, and I know Brené Brown talks about this a lot, about self-compassion, but I think there's something about giving yourself grace, and allowing and giving yourself permission to rest where you need to rest. If you're entitled to a break, have a break, give yourself permission, because you owe it to you. No one else is. If they're going to see you on that trajectory, you're going to, you'll be allowed, and you will keep doing that. And then you're setting an expectation. So there's something about having self-compassion, having grace, and having a good buddy, somebody you can speak to, or a mentor, or somebody. I think that's important as well. Having somebody who can mirror things back to you, somebody who you can trust, not necessarily a colleague, but somebody who you can trust, and just, have that conversation. I think that's good for mental health, mental well-being. Yeah. And my final suggestion would be, if you don't already, to try sitting in silence and self, and feeling the body. What's your body saying to you? Just in silence, doing nothing. And I know that's difficult, because I've been there, and sometimes I still struggle. But silence is literally golden. Try it. You'll love it.
I agree. Yeah. Nicky, any final thoughts from you tonight?
Yes, thank you. I think the thing that really stands out to me was this idea about, you're listening to your body. So the idea of actually just stopping, being okay with silence, because I think a lot of the validation that we get as in health and social care is being busy. Like, the busier we are, the more robust we are, the more we go without needing a break, the better we are. And actually, we're really valuable resources, and we cannot treat ourselves and each other like that. That can't happen. It's got to stop. It's not acceptable. And it's such a strange thing to get pleasure and professional pride in, like burning ourselves out. It's crazy. It's like, so I think, seeing that modeled right from the top, saying you will get sick, or the changes your body naturally goes through can be, lived in and experienced, or they can be something that really hurts you if you fight it all the time. So I think that message for me is the one that I thought was really helpful. And thank you for that. That's what I wanted to say.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
So, on a final note, Beverley, do we know when your book's going to be published? Because I'm sure there'll be people listening tonight who'll be interested in reading that.
Yeah, I'm hoping it's going to be next year, but I couldn't say which month. It depends who's going to publish it for me. But I would certainly say that. But once all that's up and running, I'll let you know, Vanessa and Nicky, and then hopefully you can share that and say it's out. Have a read, hopefully.
Brilliant. Yeah, that'd be fabulous. But yeah, I mean, it's been brilliant having you on, and thank you for all your wisdom that you've shared. It's been really informative, and I guess I'd echo a lot of what Nicky's said. Really, for me, what you've talked about is about authenticity and being real and looking after yourself, and I think they're really powerful messages, aren't they? And thank you for being with us, and hopefully you'll come back soon. Yeah, we'd love to have you back on a future episode.
I'd love to. Thank you.
And on that note, we'll say good night.
Good night.
Bye.